verify we have a quorum.
We have a quorum present.
Okay. Pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Everyone has a copy of the previous minutes, and if there are no changes or edits, may I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, right. So we still, that's still valid?
I know, I think you can still vote.
You can't make a motion.
Right, you can't.
Not a motion, correct.
Okay, Stacy.
All right, thank you, Chairman Roberts and members of the Board of Adjustment. As you know, we have two cases this evening. We'll start with number 2309B, which is a property located at 35622 North Tom Darlington Drive, owned by Mr. and Mrs. Bryan and Annette Renstrom. We are looking at a request to build a new pool and associated appurtenances in the rear yard. As you can see, it's a bit of a laundry list of a request. However, as you read in your report, it's interesting as how the house was cited, and based on our ordinance today, all of these things do need a variance to be approved in order to build a pool and an associated rear yard entertainment area. So to run through the request itself, is the pool is looking to be within the rear yard setback with an encroachment of 35 feet. As you recall, when we talk about these requests and encroachments, it's from the beginning or inside the property, asking how far it needs to encroach into that setback area. So the pool, although being 25 feet off the property line, is a 35-foot encroachment. Also, pool equipment, any kind of mechanical equipment is not permitted in the rear yard setback today. Their pool equipment will require a 13-foot encroachment into the rear yard setback. And lastly, likewise, the propane tank, while buried, still falls under not being permitted in any setback. And so the request for this would be 31 feet into the required 60-foot yard setback. Sorry, it's a rear yard setback. I apologize. It says front yard there. To orient ourselves, the home is located on Tom Darlington Drive, just north of Meander Way, just as you somewhat entered into the town of Carefree. Around it is already developed properties, as well as the right-of-way along Tom Darlington. Looking a little bit more closely, and as it mentioned in your report, or actually in, I would say, the applicant's narrative, and you can see it on the site plan as well, as when the house was built, it was located between two washes. So you can see just by the contours, here's a wash in this location. There's a second wash right here, so they sort of nestled the house away from Tom Darlington Drive. Even the house has some encroachment into the rear yard setback as well as the side yard setback. So ultimately, this is a home that has legal non-conforming conditions, which is one of the criteria to permit or consider the request of a variance. They're looking to propose nothing out of the ordinary that we haven't seen in Carefree before. Pool with a spa, a little barbecue space, a little fire pit area, and some associated furnishings. Through the citizen participation process, the applicant complied with the requirements. They did hear from 4 of the residents nearby, but there was no objection to the request, and staff did not receive any comments. As we've been practicing lately, the applicant now is here to make his or her presentation to you on their request also.
Welcome.
Hello, thank you, Stacy. Thank you, board. My name is Brian Renstrom. This is my wife, Nanette. We're looking to put a pool into the house here that we purchased about 2 years ago. And we found that the house doesn't really conform. We have this setback problem now. There's an existing courtyard when they built the house back in the late 80s. they intended to put a pool in and nobody ever followed through and did that, so we're kind of at that point now where we want to do that. So we went through this process. The existing courtyard is already there. We're not going to disturb anything. We're not going to add anything. We're pretty well, we're pretty well hidden there, so our neighbors really, we don't have much visual, anybody can see into there, so that's kind of what we're looking to do here, so.
We actually went and talked to the neighbors that are behind, surrounding.
Our closest.
Yeah, the closest neighbors, other than the ones, we couldn't get in contact with one of the neighbors, but we actually went and talked to them, and that's kind of the report, they actually sent me,
Positive feedback.
positive feedback, so.
Yeah.
But we actually went and talked to them just so they would know kind of what we're looking to do,
So,
so. And I don't know if there's anything
and
else.
if you have any questions,
Any questions? Motion to approve?
I'll move it. Second.
Okay, you're all set?
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
But Mary, thank you, Samantha. It is a public hearing. Just to
sure.
formalize, open the hearing, close the hearing, and then your motion.
Can I ask a question of you?
Sure.
On the agenda for this item, at the end of the approval variance from 2, then you have a note existing with the legal non-conforming portions of the structure located within the rear yard setback today. The next case that we have has very similar language, except it has another sentence that says special circumstances exist that are not self-imposed by the property owner.
I mean, that applies as well to this.
There's no significance of that son not being in the first case.
No, it just wasn't included on the agenda.
Call for the question.
We're all set?
So, did she open the public hearing, then did you need to close?
Any comments from the public? Okay, we're all set. Thank you. Motion? I so move.
And a
Second. All in favor?
Thank you.
Okay, and next one, Stacy?
Okay, so this is a second variance case that we have this evening. Very similar conditions. This one is located at 36232 Peaceful Place. The applicant is Mr. Steve Judge, representing the owners, Mr. and Mrs. Jack and Jennifer Carr. With that said, they're looking to build a new garage. Specifically, the request is looking to allow this garage and portions of the rear yard building setback, where again, such structures aren't allowed, and that encroachment they're looking at is 6 feet 10 inches into that 60-foot required yard setback. You probably read in your report, this is a unique property, Mr. Darlington's home, and designed by Gary Jones. And at that time, Mr. Jones's approach is putting the house in the most appropriate place on the property, regardless of any other sort of restrictions. And likely at the time there weren't many in place. And in fact, it's interesting, if we were looking to develop this lot today, it would more than likely be a mountainside lot, and probably would go through a similar process in terms of the siding of the home. But in any case, as you read, the proposal actually was an existing garage and a carport that was demolished. You can see that there's an existing guest house also on the property that actually encroaches more into the rear yard setback than what this proposal is requesting. It actually brings into conformance the fact that we today don't allow carports in Carefree. So understandably, this is looking to enlarge a garage, nothing unusual that we haven't seen in Carefree as well. And as you can see, it's a very small square footage that is actually going to be located within that setback. Just to see that there was a study done in terms of vantage points from the two nearest properties. This also sort of shows you just really what the elevations and the design is going to end up looking like. It really isn't changing too much from the proposed design today. Your report included a number of those exhibits, which I think gave you a little bit more refined idea as to those true viewpoints from the neighbors, as well as behind them is Maricopa County open space. With that said, similarly, the applicant did comply with the citizen participation requirements, notification, for example, and no residents reached out to that applicant or to staff. And again, the applicant is here. He has a more formal presentation for you as well. So his name is Mr. Steve Judge, so I will move out of the way and start his presentation. Welcome.
Welcome. Good evening, and board members and Stacy, thank you. Yeah, so this is, are you going to do it from there?
Well, did you want to put your presentation? So you can do it from where you like. Oh, presentation.
Same exhibit. So this is an application for demolition of the actually they got a permit to demolish the existing carport and single car garage. And they're going to construct a new 4-car garage, tandem style, so there'll be 2 cars, one in front of the other, and then 2 cars next to that, one in front of the other, on the floor plan for that. And you can see the garage there. This is the setback line here. This small triangle here is the only portion that is encroaching into the setback, and it's about 50 square feet. And the rest of it is going to be within the right, within the setback lines there. This is a view from the neighboring lot looking towards where the garage would be. Actually, I'm going to launch, if you don't mind, I'll take a minute. I'm going to launch Google Earth. It's a little bit easier to see it that way. So there's the property there, and there is the existing garage. It's right around there on the corner. So there's the garage now. There's the single car garage and the carport next to it. And we're going to be basically just going out a little bit, squaring off this little area here. And there's the neighbor's house that's adjacent to it. And their house is kind of oriented towards this elevation here. So there's a huge boulder in the way. And then the other windows are looking towards the open land. And if I spin around to the other property that's adjacent to this property, it's quite a ways away. It's all the way over here. There's landscaping in the way, there's boulders in the way, there's 2 other structures in the way, so there's not going to be much visibility from the neighboring lots. And again, this lot here is really oriented up the mountain, as I would put it, and then towards this boulder pile here. So not going to be very visible from our property to the adjacent lots. Any questions?
I've been fortunate to visit this property. Yeah, it's absolutely fabulous, and from my part, I think that's a very sympathetic addition.
Oh, thank you.
Comments, questions? Any comments or questions from the public?
I'll make a move.
Question?
I move that we approve the variance request.
I'll second it.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Samantha, we ready? Call to order the regular meeting of the Economic Development Advisory Board. Roll call, we're all set. Presentation and discussion of forecasted revenue and expenses in key economic centers. Peter?
I'll go.
You're gonna go first?
Yeah, Commissioner Roberts, just wanted to start off. It's probably going to be a longer presentation because Peter's going to be presenting the forecast, so just giving him a little ribbing. Today is, as we've been discussing and outlining economic development, understanding what economic development was. We've kind of gotten to the point where the commission has asked that we start doing more educational type series. And one of the things that has been brought up significantly is the idea of having a revenue forecast that shows that the town is going to have some kind of deficiency in the future, which is the rationale for looking at economic development in the first place. And so the first meeting that we wanted to put together, and I worked closely with Commissioner Burns as well as Councilmember Amoroso to look at what the financial future looks like for Carefree. And so what we wanted to also talk about is the opportunities that we've seen for economic development, which came out of the conversations that we had through the several meetings through council to get the economic plan approved, which is looking at, specifically like the northeast corner of Carefree Highway and Cave Creek Road, and the town center, and then also looking at potential for the resort site. But what we wanted to do is really start this off and make this more of a conversation. So what I would ask that, as we look at as a group at Economic Development Advisory Board, that we take a more casual approach and really have this as a conversation, because these are really ongoing topics where we're going to provide a lot of information. The idea is that we're going to try to look at that information, digest it, and try to come to the best conclusions as we possibly can. Because like with any forecast, and in particularly with sales tax, it's extremely difficult to forecast. So what we want to do is just get the best information on the table that allows us to make the best decisions as we possibly can for the economic development future and for the future of Carefree. And so with that, I'm just going to kick into this presentation here. Again, the Economic Development Advisory Board really is the opportunity for us to discuss economic development policies, projects, and initiatives. It's really to provide the foundation for the council decisions. And I think one of the things that a lot of people in the community feel is that there's been a void in conversation in the public that doesn't occur when things go to the council. And so what I would like to do is really take this as an opportunity to be able to vet these conversations publicly before things go to council. And that allows the council to make the best decisions and the most informed decisions, and allows a lot more people to be able to provide input. And again, really want to center this around more being a casual conversation, and at some points when we need to and it's necessary, maybe potentially make recommendations to the council for economic development policy. Again, our economic foundation as a town is really sales tax reliant, and a lot of that sales tax comes from outside the community. We're a small town and our budget really just isn't supported 100%. Matter of fact, it's probably less than 20% of our own residents support the sales tax of this community. And it's just because of the sheer size. And as we know, sales tax is one of the most volatile revenue resources, and so it's really important that we really try to get to understand it, especially as we near our build out. I know we've talked about this several times, just kind of reiterating some things, but we're also seeing some new demands for the community and things that may have a potential cost increase in the future, as well as looking at things like contracted services, which we know are just going to go up in cost as things move forward. So with that, I'd like to turn things over to Commissioner Burns, who's going to do the presentation on the forecast.
This work started,
Get
Is this
closer to
on?
the mic.
this work started when Steve and I were having a conversation about the fact that we have a town center redevelopment plan, for example, that none of you up there right now were around when we spent hours and hours and hours going over it. And nobody was really involved with the signage plan, I don't think, or the northeast corner, or the general plan amendment for the northwest corner. And so we talked about it, and then there has been some discussion going around about the town is facing a deficit, and that was scratched out, and it doesn't have bad assumptions on it, but it wasn't what you'd call a rigorous examination of the budget. So unfortunately, budgets are boring, and it's my job to make it more fun. There will be a test, just to get my bona fides, as it were,
I started working for the legislature in 1976, worked for the majority leader for 5 years, was the chief economist when we did the 1980 special session on tax reform and school finance. And so we basically rewrote the code on education and property taxes and sales tax. That's when we exempted the food sales tax and did a lot of other things. So I did a lot of forecasting while I was at the legislature. And then when Rose Mofford became governor, she asked me to join her staff as the budget director for the state. So I worked for Rose as the budget director, and then Fife Symington as the budget director, and then Jane D. Hull as the budget director. I really didn't spend that much time with Janet Napolitano, but I did go back and work with Jan Brewer when we had imposed a temporary sales tax to get through the recession. So I've done some forecasting in the past, and I know that there's a lot of citizens that are concerned about how much we spend on consultants. And I'm frankly one of the best forecasters in the state. When I originally went to be the budget director for Rose, we were in the executive budget office was in the Department of Administration, and the director of the department always wanted to know what I said to the governor about her budgets. And that got to be very uncomfortable. So the governor decided to pull my office out of the governor's office and create an office within her office called the Office of Strategic Planning and Budgeting, OSPB. It still exists today. But after about a year, they started calling it the Office and Staff of Peter Burns. And then it got worse. But in any event, so I've done some forecasting. So let me just start into this, and I start with a bunch of caveats. Well, let me start at the beginning. One is that I'm trying to take a look at FY24, which is the year that we're in, all the way to FY32, which is 9 years. Could have been 10, but templates were set up for 9 years, so we did it for 9 years. Caveats, one thing, any long-term forecast, say more than 2 or 3 years, is wrong. I can just absolutely guarantee you. So what you see today is just one path through the woods from where we stand today. And this forecast, while some accommodation you'll see has been made for economic circumstances, I'm not really projecting any recession in that time period. Currently, it seems to me that the economic thought is that the Fed will, in fact, achieve a soft landing and will make it through at least the next 3 or 4 years without any kind of recession. The forecast only covers the town's general fund and the fire fund. Town has other funds. One of the funds that it has is the Highway User Revenue Fund, which is money from the state that's supposed to be dedicated to streets and roads. And none of my calculations included any analysis of the town's expenditure limit. The town operates under a constitutional expenditure limit put in during the 1980 special session. And if you go through the budget process for the town, in fact, they just adopted the audit, you'll see that they have to do a calculation on that to make sure that they haven't exceeded it. I didn't do any of that. So maybe all this spending can happen and maybe it can't, I don't know. But, so that's a caveat. I'm gonna talk about major takeaways from what I found from the analysis. Take a look at revenues, take a look at expenditures, offer some closing thoughts. And if you take a look at the agenda for today, there's a 5-page packet that has some fairly detailed spreadsheets that go through the revenues and expenditures combined of the general fund and the fire fund together with some assumptions and other background information, most of which are included today. Major takeaways. After many years, the town has, well, for the last several years, the town has been operating in a surplus where revenues have exceeded expenditures. And if you look at the line that has the FY years on it, that's the zero line. You can see that we've been almost as high as $2.5 million excess revenues over expenditures. And starting in '24, my projections and my compilation of what's going on says that for the next 9 years, we're going to be spending our seed corn, so to speak. The cash balance that the state had for the general fund and the fire fund totaled $16.8 million at the end of '23. Under my primary forecast, which is the basic forecast, that cash balance will decline to $4.6 million at the end of '32. The primary reason being an accelerated capital improvement program, especially compared to the last 7 years. And you'll see some of this data in a minute. I also did a kind of a pessimistic forecast. And under that forecast, the ending cash balance will be less than $1.5 million at the end of '32. The reasons for that being the accelerated capital improvement program. And I assumed in FY '27 that there will be a 25% decline in the retail sales tax collections. And we'll talk about that more in a few minutes. Now, the policy of the town is stated that they're going to try to maintain a $2.5 million rainy day balance to offset economic downturns and revenue declines. But that's where they quantify it at 2.5 million, but they said that an ideal cash balance would be about 50% of expenditures. By FY '32, I'm looking at $11.5 million of expenditures, and you can see that even under the primary forecast, we would be below that with an ending cash balance. But so that's major takeaways from this analysis. Revenues. The town really enjoyed a tremendous increase in revenues between FY '17 and FY '23, which is the year we just closed back in June. We went from we basically doubled from $5.4 million to $10 million. My forecast, the primary forecast, indicates that between now and FY '32, we're only going to increase from 10 million to about 11.2 million. So you can see, if you just kind of imagine the slope of that line up there, the peak is in FY '23. So if you can imagine a line running through that, you can see that the line after that, it has a much lower slope. The lower slope means we're going to grow slower. So where do we get our revenues in Carefree? Well, right now, 60%, and again, I'm talking about the general fund and I'm talking about the fire fund. 60% of that comes from local sales tax. The other major components that we have is state shared revenues. There's four actually. Income sales, HERF. There's three major ones: income tax, sales tax, and the HERF. The HERF isn't part of the general fund, but you can see that the state sales tax and the state income tax compose 5 and 7% or 12% of our budget. Building fees are the next largest component, and then everything else that we collect is 23% of the budget. So it all rides on the sales tax. And if you look at the sales tax is not just a retail sales tax. It really encompasses a lot of different activities. Retail makes up 34% of it, roughly $2 million a year. Construction, reconstruction, remodeling, all those associated things in FY '22 made up about 15% of our revenues. Accommodations, again, in FY '22, and that would be primarily talking about Cervana and across the street here, make up about 13% of our revenues. Restaurant and bars, 8%. Utilities, you pay sales tax on your utility bill, 7%. Rental properties, 6.8%. And I'll come back and we'll talk about that later. Something that's emerged very well, accommodation has grown pretty significantly recently. Remember, if you go back a few years, Cervana was closed for remodeling. So accommodations was basically nothing. And then that came back, and now the Hampton Inn here. We'll come back on rentals. Internet is interesting because a few years ago, sales tax collections got taken over by the Department of Revenue, and they got a bigger hammer than the town of Carefree so that they can get all of the vendors, national vendors, Amazon, all those guys, they can track them and do the audits for all the cities and towns, and that has emerged as a fairly substantial revenue source. It also went up significantly during COVID, because everybody was staying at home and ordering on the internet, and now Amazon was collecting the sales tax. Services is minor use tax, primarily, I imagine, I don't know specifically, but I imagine that's when you buy a car from someplace and register it here. And then you got all this other stuff that doesn't make any difference, but that's the breakdown of the local sales tax. So we had a significant increase in sales tax collections between 20 and 23, and that's going to moderate very substantially. Between 20 and 23, you're looking at, I have a note here somewhere. You're looking at amounts, here it is, hold on a second. The big things that drove that up, as best I can tell from the data that's available, construction went up by like $400,000, internet went up by $150,000, accommodations went up by $400,000, rentals went up by $200,000. The big four there made up about $1.3 million of that big jump that we observed. And a lot of that came in at the end of the fiscal year. That's when we were, I believe that's when we were dealing with the Public Safety Advisory Committee on the fire department, and coming in June and July of that year was just a tremendous amount, unexplained amount, 23%, 25% increases in the sales tax at that time. But you see in the future, I'm looking at a much flatter growth curve than that line, the trend line that would be between 17 and 21. How did I get my forecast? Basically, I took 23 and then grew it at the JLBC growth rate, and I'll talk about that in a minute. This presentation hopefully is going to be put on the web, so you don't have to take pictures of it. And some of this is already on the web, but took 23 and grew it by the JLBC growth rate, and I'll talk about that in a minute, at 2.1%. And then I took off $200,000 each for construction and for rentals. And I held that $200,000 deduction for construction and rentals throughout the whole forecast period. I would grow the sales tax and take off a flat $200,000. But in 23, I mean, for growth into 24, I'm looking at 2.1%. Growth into 25, 3.7, 26, 4.5, 4.9, and beyond, I just took a flat 2.5% because it's so far out in the future, I have no idea. And I don't think anybody else does. What is JLBC? JLBC is the Joint Legislative Budget Committee. They were my Darth Vader to my Luke Skywalker when I was the Executive Budget Office, so they were the Legislative Budget Office. But they advise the legislature on revenue and expenditure issues. And they make assumptions and forecast the revenues. And they have what they call the Finance Advisory Committee. The Finance Advisory Committee meets about 4 times a year. JLBC has a staff of economists. They also contract with the University of Arizona to perform a forecast for them. And so for the University of Arizona, they asked them to do a low growth scenario and a base growth scenario. And then they empanel what they call the Finance Advisory Committee, which is maybe 10 to 15, maybe 20 practicing economists in the state. Could be coming from the universities, the utilities, the banks. My old office is on it. I was on it for a while. And they get a consensus forecast. So they do it by year. And they call this the 4-sector forecast. So you see 24, 25, 26, 27, that's how far out that they're projecting. And you'll see the JLBC forecast, U of A low, base, FACs, and then they take an average of that. So that 2.1 is what I'm using to grow into 24. 3, 7, 4, 5, 4, 9. In the good days, we're about 4.5 to 5.5% growth in sales tax. Now, one thing that's really important for you to understand is that the town of Carefree's sales tax base ain't nothing like the state sales tax base. For example, in retail, we have absolutely 0 car dealers. Well, cars are a very big ticket item. They're gonna be included in the state's forecast, they're not included in our forecast. So when they're looking at those percentages, they're really looking at a different kind of a base. But we're 3,800 people, and I can't do the kind of economic projections that these guys could do, so this is good enough. You understand what I'm saying? Okay. So we did that. So why adjust for construction and rentals? So up there you see from 17 to 22, let's just look at construction. Again, this is actually already on the web. Construction, you have $500,000 of collections in 17. In 18, you have 900,000. Then it falls to 770, then 500, then 425, and then 22 comes screaming back at almost $900,000. So this is some of the difficulty that Steve was talking about in terms of forecasting. Well, I don't think that we're going to, we're reaching build out. You had a lot of people with time on their hands and started remodeling, blah, 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 blah. I just can't make a forecast that starts with a base of $900,000 for construction and forecast it for 9 years. Not happening. So I took $200,000 off of that number. Similarly, with rentals, you got 360, 218, 174, 120, 200, 423. Whoa, I don't know where that came from. So maybe that's a whole bunch of VRBOs. Maybe it's a whole bunch of people renting ATVs and going to some place and renting tools so they could do the construction work. I don't know. You got $400,000. I don't think, well, first, I'm not sure that that would be sustainable, but second, the legislature just passed legislation that exempted residential rental from sales taxes by cities and towns. State got rid of that tax years and years ago, but the cities and towns, at their choice, could continue to do that. So for us, I haven't seen any forecast that drills down small enough for the town of Carefree, but for example, Tempe, big university town, big rental, they're talking $25 million a year hit because the legislature decided to remove that. So one of the adjustments that I made to the sales tax collections was to take $200,000 out of construction and $200,000 out for rentals. And, is that the right number? I don't know. But at least I'm acknowledging the fact that something could be happening. Okay, I did kind of a pessimistic scenario, and under the pessimistic scenario, I reduced local sales tax collections by 25% of the FY22 retail collections, which amounts to about $500,000. And I take that out in 27 and beyond. And why did I do that? Well, I wanted to get a pessimistic forecast to see what that means. Could that account for a recession? Yes. Could that account for one or more retail sales tax collectors ceasing to do business in Carefree? Yes. Could it be a change in purchasing patterns of Carefree residents and or visitors? Maybe nobody comes here and buys any stuff anymore, or maybe everybody shops down at Safeway and Fry's and not at Bashas'. Last year, the legislature, I think, passed twice, once for sure, but maybe twice, prohibiting cities and towns from collecting sales tax on food. Again, the state exempted that in 1980, but many cities and towns, including Carefree, continue to levy a sales tax on food. We have 2% of our 3% is taxed on food. The 3rd % does not apply to that. So right now, the legislature's looking at being $400 million upside down. I'm not sure that they're going to go rally that flag again. But it's a possibility that by 27, that becomes the cause célèbre. Is all of those things could happen simultaneously? None of them could happen. So, but we have a pessimistic forecast to take a look at that. Okay, so once I did the forecast, how has the picture changed? Well, if you you see, in '23, sales tax makes up 60% of our revenue. In '32, I'm looking at 67% of our revenue. And that's basically because all the state shared income taxes, sales taxes, HERF taxes, they're not gonna grow, okay? All of those shared revenues from the state are based on the town of Carefree's population compared to the rest of the state's or incorporated cities and towns. Well, Chandler added 126,000 people last year. We got 4,000 people, and we're at build out, folks. You know, we're just gonna be a smaller percentage of everything. We're gonna have to hope that that horse just runs the race fast enough so that we don't have a net negative, if you understand what I'm saying. So those taxes are gonna be going down. And we don't have a whole lot of other things going on. One of the big all other accounts in FY '23 was that the town made about $450,000 on interest because they had a $16 million deposit with the state treasurer earning interest on investments. Well, as you saw, we're gonna be spending that down because we're gonna be negative. So that interest earning is going to be down. And frankly, in my forecast, as you'll see later, I took out, that's probably the most conservative thing. I didn't have anywhere near $400,000 in expenditures. So this is the growth trend of what we're looking at of the major revenue sources, actual and forecast, until the date line gets to one line from two lines. Up to FY '23 is actuals, 24 through 32 is forecast. You see the high blue dotted line is local sales tax. The state income tax sharing, you see we're gonna get a bump in '24, and the bump in '24 is, well, you're gonna see a bump and then you're gonna see a decline and then it's gonna go crazy. But what the legislature did is they passed, you'll all be pleased with this when you do your state income taxes, they passed a 2.5% flat income tax. And the cities and towns get, by constitutional amendment, by initiative in 1972, get 15% of the 2 years prior collections. So cities and towns didn't want the legislature to reduce income taxes because that's gonna come back and bite them in 2 years. So the legislature did a deal with them, and the deal was we'll make the 15% 18%, and then they won't admit this, but they put it into effect a year early. So the states, the town like Carefree is going to enjoy a huge run-up in state shared revenues because we're getting 18% of the old tax base. But now, part of the reason why the legislature has a $400 million deficit is that they underestimated the impact of moving from a progressive income tax to a flat income tax. So absolute state level income tax collections are going to decline unless you're a true believer in supply side economics, and then maybe, you know. So you see the red line is the state income tax. State sales tax is that weird dotted line down there. And then all others, the big one that goes up, and that includes your interest earnings and various other building fees, court fines, yada, yada, yada. So that's how what you're looking at in the future. Basically, you got your sales tax to ride on. That's what you got. Okay, let's talk about expenditures. Historically, Carefree expenditures increased from $5 million to $8.3 million, from $5 million in 17 to $8.3 million in 23. And even that increase in 23 was to some extent fueled by a pickup in capital expenditures. The forecast indicates that expenditures will reach a peak in FY '31 at $13.6 million and then decline to 11.8. And the question is, what the hell are they spending money on? So before we talk about that, let's just talk about the major components of expenditures. Capital improvement, this is FY '23. Capital improvement program, 26%. I think we spent $2.3 million on capital improvements, and they had to do with street resealing, and some, can't remember what the other major components were. We'll see in a minute. Rural metro fire protection is 22% of our budget. General Works, Public Works Department keeps the streets clean, takes care of the landscaping, yada, 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 10%. Administration, 7%. Law enforcement, 7%. And everything else that we spend on is 28%. So that's carefree spending. Capital improvement program. If you look back there in 17, 18, 19, I guess in, what is that, 20, we hit $1 million in capital expenditures. 21 it declined, 22 it went up, 23 it went up significantly. My forecast for 24 through 31 includes about $3.4 million of capital expenditures. And you're saying, what is that all about? Well, talked to the town and said, tell me what your roughly 10-year capital expenditure plan is. So you see down the left-hand side, I have town center / improvements, construct flood drainage, water projects, town center redevelopment, a median project, pedestrian crosswalks, street maintenance. So you have the total capital improvement program in 20 was at $900,000, and that was high if you go back and look at that. So 20 at $1 million was high compared to what we had been, and if you went back even farther than that to 14, we weren't spending anything. Well, what are we talking about going forward? Well, you got town center improvements up there, $400,000 a year, whatever. Flood drainage, you go from $25,000 to $750,000 up there, and some of that project is actually working right now. I understand on Carefree Drive. Isn't that right? That you got the big detour around there? And there's gonna be one by the circle here, isn't there, I think? You got a pedestrian crosswalks, $500,000-600,000, and then street maintenance, $3 million, $4 million, 3.2, then 3, and some of that got deferred in terms of resealing during COVID. We didn't do that. And then this past year or two ago, we did Cave Creek Road up here where we tore it out and relayed it all. So those are all the street projects that are in there. So, you know, I'm an old budget guy, and I've heard more agencies, and their timing is generally atrocious. So what I did is I just took a straight average of what all those years' capital expenditure programs were, and then I squinted my eyes, and if you look in the yellow, I took 85% of it and said, that's gonna be the capital improvement program. I'm not gonna tell you when it is. I'm just gonna put the average in for each year at $3.4 million. Boom, 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 boom. So that's when you go back to this slide, you see how the capital expenditures ramp up? That's what's in it, and then they're flat because I just loaded them as flat because it's hard enough to just get the amounts, let alone the timing. Okay, so, but that capital improvement program does not include the fire capital improvement program. And you're looking at, this year, we're talking about a new pumper, about $935,000. We're unloaded, well, the mayor just wrote out a letter, and I think we're spending $150,000 for a brush truck, and yada, yada, yada. And then you got some nickel and dime relative. You know, I mean, when I was a state budget director, a $20,000 line item, really? You're talking to me about a $20,000, anyway. Here, it's important. So you see it bounces around, and then it spikes there in 31, and perhaps that's another replacement fire engine. I don't know what that is, but all of this capital improvement project of you know, budget hearings, budget discussions, then they're going to be starting probably April, May. They got to adopt a budget by sometime in late May or early June. Now, there's some things that was in the capital program that I got that I didn't even include, and you can see what they're there. Mechanical equipment replacement, okay, fine. Traffic signage replacement, okay. Traffic calming program funding, okay. And then there's some big projects. The regional street project, that's a MAG program, that's PEMA. Stagecoach to Cave Creek, and Tom Darlington Cave Creek Road intersection. They're talking about maybe that could be happening. This money I didn't put in the forecast. Couple of reasons. One, I'm a budget director, and I can just say no, and I don't have to explain myself. The second reason is that I told you that one of the funds that's not included in here is the HERF fund. The HERF fund is funding that's used for streets and highways and roads and all of that, and it has some money in it. The second thing is that the NAG project there is a grant and match program, and I think that we have to put up about 25% of that, but I didn't go into all the details. I know that there's a pot of money and a stream of money. Maybe it's enough, maybe it's not enough to deal with the FEMA road thing, but that's not in there. But those are on the list. If the town sat down and wrote their Christmas list up for what's your capital expenditures, that's what they're looking at. This money I did not put in the forecast. So, the other one that's a little scary is rural metro. Our current contract with rural metro runs through 27. What will happen to after that is uncertain. I took the date of the new contract, and that first little jump that you see there is the increase that they gave us before with the new contract. And then the contract is tied to CPI or not to exceed 3% or 4%, whatever it is. So I think that's growing at 2.5%, 3.5%, something like that. But that contract expires in 27. I don't know what's going to happen at the end of 27. I don't think that rural metro is making money in the East Valley. I don't think they're making money here. I don't think they're making money in Rio Verde, Ponto Verde, wherever their other station is over there. And I suspect, and I understand that there's some action on between hedge funds in New York about rural metro. I don't know what the story is with the rural metro, but in FY 27 going into 28, I just did a flat bump of $1 million for their contract, and then just left it flat in 28 and beyond. You know, is that what's going to happen? I don't know, but I'm at least trying to think about what's going on. So you got that's fire protection. So if we look at our spending today compared, and remember now, you saw what's in capital program. But if you look at 23 compared to 32, you see that capital program will shift back a little bit. Rural metro is going to grow. Public works is going to stay about the same, as is administration, law enforcement. I'll talk about that in a moment, but that's a risky endeavor that we're dealing with there, and all others staying about the same, because and if you look at the spreadsheets that are on the web, you'll see that most of those expenditure line items, I'm just growing at 4%, 4% a year, 4% a year, 4%. Law enforcement, I think I'm growing at 10% a year, because that's a cost sharing thing, and we can talk about that again in a moment. So how will expenditures change? Well, the big heavy blue line is the capital improvements program. We just went through that. We were spending nothing. We built up a big surplus. Now we're going to go spend it all. So you see the blue line rises up there, it goes flat, and then I just have it tail off at the end. The dashed rural metro, the red line kind of, that grows. You see the new contract, and then the contract expires, and I put the $1 million jump in there, so that's going to increase. Public works is just going to bump along, what they're doing. Administration is going to bump along. Law enforcement I have kind of growing a little bit faster because I'm putting in a 10% growth rate. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And then finally you have all other, which is that dotted green line. And the two spikes that you see in there is one, the $1.3 or $4 million that we're going to spend this year, or 24, for the new fire truck and the brush truck. And then that big peak way out at the end is that other $1 million that I showed you that was going to be up here in 32. So that's how the composition of the spending will change. Closing thoughts. This is budget 101, by the way. This is like, this is how using a forecast, that's fine. This forecast is just one view. I mean, I'm sure it's not gonna happen this way. Think about it, in 2014, who would have projected to 2023 and included a worldwide pandemic? Revenues, the town's fiscal structure is highly dependent on local sales tax. Forecast indicates that we're going from 60 to 67% of all our revenue is gonna be that. With extreme reliance comes extreme risk. Economic risk, behavioral risk, i.e. where you shop, legislative risk, what the Henry David Thoreau said, no man safe so long as the legislature's in session. The town has limited options with respect to sales tax growth. It has to exercise those options very thoughtfully. And there's little prospect for significant growth in state shared revenues because, as we talked about, the formula for distributing those funds is the ratio of population, and we just ain't in the race. The most conservative revenue component is, as I talked to you before, interest earnings. We were over $400,000, and I think the forecast is less than $100,000 over the time period. Undoubtedly, it's going to go down. I'm not sure it's going to go down that hard, that fast, for that long. Okay, expenditures. Expenditures for the capital improvement program is the single most important element of the forecast. Significantly increased expenditures and draws down the town's cash balance. Capital is the easiest budget item to cut or defer. The question is, at what cost? You don't redo the roads, how much is it going to cost you when you have to go back and do them because they're full of potholes? The greatest risk on the expenditure forecast is for fire protection. We talked about that. I don't know how the contract is going to be renewed, under what terms, or if it is even going to be renewed. The second greatest risk is the law enforcement. Two pressures on law enforcement right now. On the demand side, there's call for greater law enforcement presence in Carefree. Motorcycle week, we need guys parked on the side of the block. On the supply side, is that our contract with them is a cost reimbursement contract. Right now, MCSO is operating under a DOJ consent decree. So the court can tell them what they have to spend money on, and a lot of that will go into overhead. And overhead is a pass-through item. So we may see that, and MCSO doesn't have the total luxury to control their costs. That was one of the complaints that Sheriff Penzone talked about when he resigned from office. And then finally, the opportunities to reduce expenditures outside of the capital improvement. Capital improvement program is happy hunting grounds. I mean, if you want to cut a lot of money, that's where you're going to find it. The question that you just have to keep in mind is, what's it going to cost you down the road? But beyond that, I mean, you know, a lot of our departments have one or two people in it. It's not like you can furlough 10% of your workforce or something like that. And there's very small staffing spending outside of staff. Okay, the final words. The town's policy of maintaining a targeted level of rainy day fund, whether it's at set value of $2.5 million or 6 months of expenditures, is very wise, and it should be preserved to the greatest extent possible. Should manage to it. And apologies for the length of this presentation. I hope everyone's interested as recording the college football championship. I did. So please, if you know what the score is, don't say anything. Questions, observations? Yes.
So I really do appreciate that you use a lot of pessimistic assumptions, right? Focus is all about that assumption.
Well, sure.
So actually, I can understand it. Focus is tough because that's kind of what I did for like 5 years when I was working. So, but you always have pessimistic forecasts, and you should also have assumption optimistic, right? And kind of see the both assumptions.
I tell you what, when you triple my salary that they pay me to do this, I might do another forecast for you.
Yeah, so I do feel like we were realistic, and I didn't feel like I got that. My second comment is expenditures. There was all other was like
got all the elements there.
Appreciate it. Can I actually really keep this?
Yes, you can really keep, you can print your own copy too.
And,
So
and
even the spreadsheet that you did pass out though is more optimistic,
It's the base forecast.
yeah, the baseline forecast. The one on the spreadsheet that
Yeah.
you have, so that is the.
So there is a, there is an optimistic forecast.
Well, I did a base forecast and a pessimistic forecast.
Oh, okay, got it.
Okay, so I got this is what I believe is happening, but you don't have a recession in there. How can you not recognize that the history has rental taxes on rented residential? How can you, so then I moved it down, and that's on the second page.
And just to reiterate, all this is going to go up on the website. Any information that you see is going to be up available. And the idea is that, you know, for further input as we move forward, if people, you know, this is a lot of information. And so this will be a continuous conversation. It's not a destination. This is a journey, and we all know that. I stole that. I told him I was going to steal that line from him today. And so just to let everybody know that that's what this is, you're going to have the information available to look it over. I don't know if you guys have
Short-term rentals, taxed as hotels.
I don't know.
You know, Stacy, they should be, because they are hotels that operate in
I
our neighborhoods.
think that they're a combination, and they're not classified as rented residential for the purposes of what the legislature repealed the tax on.
And I'm also curious how much revenue comes in from the hotels.
Well, that would be proprietary information.
So even if we were to build another one, it would still be proprietary.
Well, if you got more than 10, it probably wouldn't be.
This is by state law. This is by state law.
Well,
I can't hear you.
you know,
This is by state law, what
They're-
information is provided and what can be public. The information that comes in specific to different sectors, is under an NDA signed by people in town hall. They cannot share that with, and be specific about it with anyone. They
But-
can't even share it with anyone on town council or anybody.
but
Understood that it's proprietary, understood. But given that, and the fact that economists are notoriously
medias.
wrong in their predictions,
No,
and
that's why-
they apologize because this happened and that happened, how can we, as a community, believe what will happen in 10 years, 8 years, 6 years?
As
You know,
it's a
Reagan
forecast,
said,
that's
we
why.
can't verify. That's why you keep a $2.5 million cash balance, or there's, you know, at 50%, you'd be talking $5.5 million cash balance.
No one can predict the
Right.
future, there are no facts about the future. And so what we're doing is using the base case scenario in order to put, the base case out there in the sense that this is just very simple, based on the legislative analyst's office, what they think the growth trend is gonna be in the state of Arizona. We have no idea. If we could have a recession in 3 years, we could have a deep recession in 3 years. We just don't know. So this is the base to give you a foundation of what we're looking at, but no one can predict what's we're gonna look like in 5 years.
I mean, and this is true for any entity. We don't know precisely, but having some forecast gives us better information than sticking your finger up in the air and seeing where the wind is blowing. Just knowing you're not going to count on that. But that's true for a corporation, it's true for a government, it's true for an individual. You try to forecast to give you some guidance.
And we're trying to be careful because our job is to provide services. And we need money to provide services into perpetuity. So we don't wanna have a super optimistic forecast saying that we have so much money, we can do all kinds of things and have all of our dreams come true. That's just unrealistic. I would never, ever, ever, in my career investing in public infrastructure and state and local governments, I saw the
right, Melissa.
Question.
Mr. Burns, I was told at one time that almost $1 million fire truck was, actually they obtained a grant, but they.
No, no. The Fort McDowell Indian Reservation gave us a grant. I want to say either $77,000 or $98,000 for the brush truck, but that was an unequipped brush truck. So we have to, and then there was a supply chain issue, and this and that. The mayor just put it in his Christmas message. Do I have to hold this to talk? The mayor just put in his Christmas message, didn't he, that or New Year's message, that I think we're spending $144,000 total, and he acknowledged the grant from Fort McDowell. The new fire truck's $935,000. I mean, that's what it is. And then you have to equip it. Yes, sir.
First of all, nice job on the presentation.
Thank you.
Concise, nice job. Just a quick question. Is Tom Darlington and Cave Creek the only intersection construction that's included in this?
Look, oh no, you had Pima Road,
Okay.
and then that was on the stuff that I did not include. And then I put almost, I think 8 of the 9 years in the forecast had street maintenance, which can be everything from seal coating and slurry sealing to digging it up and relaying it.
I think the question's related to, when you did your sales tax forecast, did you include new tax generation, or did you just leave that?
Why would spend, no.
No.
That's,
Yeah, the 2 intersections is what we were talking about.
well,
That's my question.
I don't know. As far as I know, there's only that intersection, and the Pima Road is a widening.
Oh, okay, thank you.
It is? It isn't? Oh, okay, then I don't, look, alls I did is write down the number.
No, that's
You
fine.
know, I'm
That's
not
why
the.
we ask questions. Don't take offense.
No, we'd have to hire a consultant to tell us what the road's gonna be, I don't know.
So the part you left out was for the intersection and portions of Pima, but that is the one, we have to pay 30% of that.
Yeah,
So even though it's $4 million, we don't have to pay the full amount.
Go for it.
Peter, do you know what Tom Darlington and Carefree Highway, what that's going to be? Because
No, I
thought that was Scottsdale.
no, they're not no, we're talking Cave Creek and Tom Darlington.
Cave Creek, okay.
Yeah, but I don't know any of those projects. I said, I need a capital plan. What's your capital plan? And these were the numbers, and I said, okay, 85%. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I don't know. That's for the budget process. Yes?
2 questions. First of all, is the town still considering a new town hall? Because you didn't include that, I don't think.
It's not in there. I think that that's still on the boards, and I think that we might even be talking about it here. And that's a whole different world of financing altogether. But we can, that's.
Yeah, the second half of this will be talking about economic opportunities and kind of outlining. So while we can't really talk about necessarily specific sales tax numbers that we see as far as what the state provides us as sales tax numbers, matter of fact, I can't even look at those. Only a handful of people are allowed to actually look at those numbers. So I have to work backwards. And everything I do is from the bottom up, trying to justify whatever those revenue numbers are, just going out and looking at what the marketplace is showing, what our square footages are, just going and actually doing a lot of original research. So what Peter and I did was, he did his forecasting. I went and did my analysis on looking at it from the ground up as far as what our opportunities look like, and then kind of where did we meet? And we were pretty darn close. That's how we met in the middle as far as where is the opportunities that we can foreshadow, that we can develop, kind of match what we see as the deficits as far as being able to fund future infrastructure and potentially future services in the town. So that's kind of how we approach this. It's a little weird. When I worked for larger cities, I just got the data and I could just look at it. I can't do that here. And so I'm just going to kind of start off here. Again, I'm not going to belabor just really what the opportunities are. I think we know that we're very limited at what they are. It's Carefree Highway, Cave Creek Road intersection, our town center, and then Tom Darlington and Carefree Highway. I mean, those, it's taking us a little sweet time to get there. So those really are the opportunities when we start looking at traditionally for when you look at economic development and growth, is going to be your commercial areas. And arterial intersections generally are the locations that you're going to try to develop those. Again, man, this thing is just on the slow boat. Sales tax revenue threats. This is why I need to just do white slides without all the bells and whistles. You know, again, looking at, when we look at a sales tax generated economy or town, we're looking at a macro economy of volatility. You know, we don't know what's going to happen in the retail world. Matter of fact, one of the things I'd like to do in the future, and then hopefully in the near future, is bring somebody who's an expert in retail development to kind of give us a good update as to what they foresee and foreshadow for the greater Phoenix marketplace, is just to give us a little bit more of a retail forecast. So I'll look to do that in the next meeting or so. And then, you know, just looking at our contracted costs, again, it's and that comes down to our public safety as being the number one, and I think Peter outlined that. You know, replacement, retail displacement, and dead space. And that's one of the things when we start looking at our commercial allows for a lot of different uses other than retail. And so when we start looking at our commercial space, a lot of it's filled up with office, some of it's filled up with non-conforming spaces. You know, some of it's, very little of it's vacant at this time. And then you have dead space, which isn't even on the market at all. And as an example, Los Portales, the whole entire bottom floor is completely left off. And so we're missing 7,200 square feet of space that could be on the market that isn't currently in the market. You know, we have owners not willing to reinvest, kind of leads to a lot of that. Interest in putting on generating uses on key commercial corners. This is, I'm speaking as your economic development guy, so this is important to me. And as we start looking at, you know, there was an attempt to put high density residential on one of our key corners with the Thompson Thrift proposal. And, you know, they just did another project, very similar to it, right down the road at Dove Valley and I-17, 286 apartments, 28 units per acre is what they proposed, or what they're building over there. And I just, again, I'm so glad at this point we've kind of moved on from that type of project to go on that particular corner, because we really need, it's extremely important to us. You know, and then, you know, and again, we went through the process to put the special planning area in place for a resort development on a key intersection. Again, a lot of thought and interaction with the community and the neighborhood went into that. And it's just one of those things where we're looking at the long-term future of the town and being able to fund things that we just need to make sure that we've protected ourselves to be able to do that. And then, you know, just the reduction of retail sales tax opportunities. Peter really walked a lot through this. Construction sales tax is going to probably take the significant hit. You know, we don't know the status of grocery food tax, and then we just lost the residential rental tax, and so it's just the nature of the beast. One of the key, and this was highlighted as the economic development plan as one of the top places we wanted to focus on, which is, it's really the intersection of Carefree Highway and Cave Creek Road. And, you know, so currently we have a StoreQuest, we have Lowe's, and we had a CVS. And while Lowe's is still doing really well, and StoreQuest, I think, is fully occupied, or close to fully occupied, you know, CVS left. They had to make a decision where they're downsizing in a lot of locations. It's not just CVS. All of the pharmacies are doing this. Walgreens is going through a very similar process. And so now we're left with about a almost 14,000 square foot building. I talk with the owner, or not the owner, but the owner's rep every other week, a guy named Eric Butler, and just trying to find out what we can put in that building. We did get them in contact with the Trader Joe's folks and their representatives, and I know they made a run at that, and I think we got fairly far through the process, the issue being, trying to talk to everybody, fairly, so they went through that process, and really the big issue was parking and just the way the layouts, and I know they've been going into these types of facilities, and their big problem has been just being able to provide enough parking. I think you're going to see them moving out of a lot of those locations and trying to find better real estate. The big opportunity that we currently have is obviously the northeast corner, and I just want to provide an update on where we are with that. With this particular project, I spent some time with the ownership, and I know Stacy has met with them as well, and Gary, and we really kind of talked through what the issues are, and the idea that I think the best opportunity is for Empire, who owns the property, to self-perform. And they've agreed with that process, and then they have initiated that. To give you a little bit of background, you know, this was, this site plan and the zoning for this site plan was created in 2017. It's, and I'll backspace here. I'm only showing 2 out of the 3 parcels because one of the parcels is really dedicated to office. And you can kind of see this on the plan. It is the spot that is up above the wash area there. So I'm focusing on everything that's kind of inside that wash as being the retail area. And so we're looking at roughly 23 acres for the potential of about 125,000 square feet of retail. Empire has come into us. They were talking about, and they've partnered with Diversified Partners, who has worked with Westcor, now Macerich, on a lot of their projects. They do development, plus they do a lot of tenanting. So they have a great access base to a lot of commercial and real estate or retail tenants. Diversified is a retail developer and a retail brokerage firm. So that is their prime bread and butter. And they want to come in and they want to build to the plan. They like this plan. They see the plan is the fastest pathway to get something done, is to stick with this specific plan. They may tinker with and alter it, but ultimately want to stay in conformance with what's been approved. The big issue we have on this particular site at this point are our biggest issues. One is the wash that runs through it. So if I go back here, and you can't see, there it is. There's this large wash that runs through. This wash carries a significant amount of water. And according to the engineering that was done in 2017, and basically floods in high peak a vast majority of this particular site. Because this roadway acts as a dam, and we can't expand the opening here because then you start flooding everything that's already been designed on this side of the road. So, because I asked that question. So there's a couple things that are happening. One is they're looking at ways to look at the re-engineering of this and looking back at upstream flows since 2017. A lot of stuff has been built where they're going to require to have on-site retention. That may have decreased the amount of downstream flow that impacts this, which could reduce the cost of relocating this particular wash to maximize the amount of available square footage for development.
So we just put a pipe under the road and run it into Cave Creek?
Yeah, well, we're running it. The problem is we put well, it's flowing the wrong way. So it's flowing back into Carefree on the other side.
Oh.
Yeah.
Flowing east or west?
It's flowing west. West goes into Lowe's.
Yeah,
So
no, I'm saying, let's put a pipe under Lowe's.
Yeah.
Get to the town line right there real quick, and then it's Cave Creek's problem.
Yeah, you said it. And so when we start looking at this particular site here, they're looking at, you can see they significantly have to reroute the wash this way. They're looking at ways to maybe look at straightening it. They're looking at how this cost can be reduced by looking at a new evaluation of the flow numbers. They're in that process right now. The other thing that they've been doing is obviously talking to Scottsdale about what those improvements are going to look like. Are they going to change and alter from what was approved on this particular site plan? Or what's the timing? What
Scottsdale is doing with Carefree Highway.
what Scottsdale is doing with Carefree Highway. So that's another thing that they're working on, is just trying to understand that particular timing, and then what those costs are, and then also looking at the offsite utilities, including water. So now that there is a water line that I believe Greg told me it goes to 46th Street or 54th Street, I can't remember, down the road, they're gonna have to attach into that. What's the hookup fees for hooking into that? What's the additional cost to bring that water line over to this particular site? And then the wild card obviously is Liberty Sewer, which, you know, they're gonna have to figure that one out. And I know they've been in discussions with them. As it relates to the wash, they're gonna have to work with the flood control district, and they'll do that in conjunction with town staff. And so we're bringing in a new new engineer on the 22nd through a contract basis. No? He's gonna be town engineer? Okay, so we'll have a town engineer, which hopefully we can really get that process moving forward as quickly as possible. But we're not holding anything up.
So this is a complicated site.
It's a complicated site, but in the meanwhile, we got some really good horsepower there. The owner is invested in getting this done as soon as possible. You know, they've held on to it for long enough now, and they're now wanting to just get this done, and which is very positive for us. The good news is that Diversified Partners, again, has a lot of horsepower, and they have been telling us they're having success in their outreach program right now to potential retail tenants, which is very, very good.
Would this be the kind of a site that Trader Joe's would be looking at?
Potentially. They don't tell me who they're reaching out to. But they tell me the types. You know, they're reaching out to grocers, they're reaching out to restaurants, both, you know, casual restaurants, sit-down restaurants, as well as, you know, they're looking at the pads. So those are the things that they do tell. Their goal is to bring retailers in and not, you know, they do have a medical office as part of their sign, but that's because of the northern part of the site. So that is, they feel that they're gonna have a good opportunity to put medical office into there.
You could be a great American hero if you brought in Trader Joe's.
Yeah, I know, everybody says Trader Joe's,
Yeah.
until we lose the grocery tax, but even then we'll still have a quality retailer. So yeah, I mean, obviously that would be the big win, but they've actually had some really good ideas that I didn't even think of, that if they can make those happen, would be home runs as well. So Walt Brown's the guy that heads up Diversified, and he's been involved in this business here probably for the last 30 years, so he's very well known and very well respected. So that's what's happening with on this particular site, and so we'll keep working with Empire and Diversified, and as much as we can know and understand and tell you guys, we'll do that. If there's opportunities to bring them in to provide a presentation, we'll do that as well.
You said that their timing is moving up. Do you have any idea what that means, like 6 months, a year?
Well, their timing is ASAP, but as they say, they just got to figure out how to figure out the cost on the ditch. I mean, that's really what it is. So to them, it's getting these costs. They're going to have to reconcile what they can get as far as revenue. So they're out there looking and pounding the pavement on what they can get committed, as much as they can get committed on the retail side. That'll generate what kind of revenue they can show, and then they got to look at what these costs are. So until they get that cost number down, I can't give you a time frame. I just can tell you that they're interested in moving as fast as they possibly can. So, you know, assuming they can get that engineering completed and everything done, I would say that we're looking at, you know, maybe by the late spring time frame, I think, for them to kind of come to some kind of conclusion with, I mean, you're involving the flood control district and the city of Scottsdale and all those entities. It's just not going to move as fast as you think. So, but I would hope that we can move on something with them within this calendar year. Any other questions?
I think you have a question in the back.
One quick question, did Mr. Burns incorporate any of the potential sales
No.
tax? Thank you.
I have a question. Is there any way the town can exert pressure on the owner of Los Portales? Because that's just a derelict building sitting there that could otherwise be bringing in revenue.
Yeah, so I'm just getting rid of the town center right here. So I'll go through that.
Okay.
Yep. The next place, you know, we'll talk about, and I'll address that question. So, under town center, you know, again, looking back at, you know, how do we start building up the revenue projections that we see, or what the revenue is that an individual area can generate. And like you'll see on here, I have estimated hospitality. These are not the numbers that came from the actual sales tax. These are the numbers that I did as far as an estimation based on number of rooms, what they charge, what I believe, and what they tell me what their occupancy loads are. And so that's how I look at that. I think it comes pretty darn close to what the subsector of hospitality numbers that Peter is talking, has been able to look at. So I think we're really close on that. And I think also in looking at all the numbers, I think this really pretty much starts to marry up to where we look at the retail sales tax being generated by these areas actually is. And so one of the things I just want to walk through is again, looking at the pure amount of retail that we have. When we look at town center, not every building's a retail building, and not every retail building has retail uses in it. And so when we start looking at the total occupancy of potential retail space, we actually have a very high occupancy of potential retail at about 98% when you look at the total amount of square footage. So matter of fact, I have retailers who are asking me to come in and they're looking for locations, and they don't really have a lot of options to where they want to go. You know, and so, for instance, I try to get them to the bank building over here, which has never really been a retail building, you know, the vacant bank that's sitting right next door. But there's some, you know, 400 square feet here, a couple hundred square feet here, and outside of that, we're pretty booked up. And then I look at the percentage of occupancy generating tax, and that's about 55%. I think that's pretty low when we start looking at the total amount of retail space. And you know, again, some of this is non-conforming uses. The place right next to venues, I can now would consider a it's been sitting there for 2 years just storing stuff. And from my perspective in this town, you need a special use permit to store. But we have things that aren't producing retail sales tax at those locations. You know, the other one that I'm trying to pay attention to is this meadery. I've seen this where we give a retail, we have a tasting room, and all of a sudden we're doing wholesale business. We have a soap manufacturing facility in one of our buildings. They're not generating any sales tax. And so those are the things that we're starting to look at. And then, you know, also when we look at all of our health and beauty, which is a great component to the town, and you want to have a level of service that brings customers. The problem with it is it doesn't really generate a ton of sales tax, because the only thing they can charge tax on is the incidental stuff they sell out at the front, shampoos and all those things. But the bulk of their services and costs, we don't get any tax on that. So I think a lot of people think we do, but we don't. And then we obviously have dead space that we're dealing with, and honestly, we do have marginal space when we start looking at our retail. And so, is a retailer or a quality retailer really going to go in that space? And that kind of goes back to the question that was asked: is what type of quality retailer is going to go into a building like Los Portales? You know, and so I know it's been being billed as antique mall, and we've been getting some antique users in there, and they've been fairly successful as far as being on Easy Street. But when you get internal to the mall, I think those retailers tend to struggle. So going back to the question of can we put pressure on them? Well, as a town, we can do whatever we can. You know, we have to hold them accountable. All buildings have to be held accountable. That means they have to meet the fire code, they have to meet the building code, they have to do all of those things, you know, health and safety codes. And so the town, and I'm gonna tell you right now, it's one of the things that we're working closely on with our building safety and with Rural Metro as the fire marshal to really get a better handle, because as the fire marshal goes into those buildings every year to do inspections, A, we need to make sure these buildings are safe. And two, we need to make sure that they're complying with what the basic codes are. And so that's where that starts as far as our enforcement goes. But the state of Arizona, you know, and I have to say, I agree with the state of Arizona on this. We have a very strong private property rights state. And so, you know, private property owners have a significant amount of rights. And as far as this town, we're not going in and condemning a building like Los Portales. You know, so what kind of pressure can we put on? I really think a lot of the pressure for those types of buildings just needs to come from the community itself. I mean, it's just the way it is. We just can't accept that that's the type of business model that we want for our town. So
we as a town have no power to put any pressure on the buildings you're talking about, Los Portales, the bank building, and the marginal ones you referred to. We cannot put any kind of ordinance into our bylaws to do that right here.
yeah, honestly, there's not a tremendous amount we can do beyond what the building safety codes and the fire codes are. So let's say, for instance, that in that particular building, the bathrooms aren't open and aren't ADA accessible. I've actually asked this question because I think the bathroom should be ADA accessible for all the tenants that are on that first floor. The building safety folks are telling me basically at this point, while if it was a new building, they could make sure that those buildings would have, that bathroom would have to be in place and it would have to be open. But what really, now that it's closed, it becomes a civil matter. So the only thing that can happen is tenants can sue. But you're a month-to-month tenant, and you file a lawsuit, I'm guaranteeing you're just gonna get your lease canceled and you're gonna be kicked out. So that's just how the business model works. And so what happens is that it's extremely difficult. So the idea then becomes, how do you dangle the carrot? If you can't beat them with a stick, then how do you dangle a carrot that allows them? But even if you dangle the carrot, they still have to be interested in wanting to take the carrot and provide the rest of the garden, you know. So, and that's one of the programs that we are working on, is looking at a facade improvement program. We're trying to bring buildings up to, you know, out of blight condition. And so it's a program we're working on this year as part of the economic development plan. It's something that we're gonna be bringing back to this advisory board and having that conversation. And the idea is that you take a percentage of money and you use that to leverage private investment into fixing up some of these buildings. But yeah.
So, is there any plots of land that are being considered for parking? Owned by the town?
Owned by the town? So as far as parking goes, what we own, I mean, the only things we were considering as far as ownership was maybe through the circulation planning, looking at our right-of-way to do on-street parking. We don't own a ton of land. That's the problem. So the town owns our town hall site, and we have parking on the town hall site, and we make that available for public use. The area that we're really focused in on parking is looking at the area behind the Shell station, and which I would call the two most blighted buildings in town. Those buildings have been deemed unoccupiable by Rural Metro, as well as our building safety has confirmed that. APS is going in, I think if they haven't already done it, to pull the meters, because there were live wires in there and a live meter. I mean, the whole place is, and you're right next to a gas station with receptacles that have no, I mean, it was just, the whole situation to me was completely dangerous. To be able to level that out, and but again, we're relying on the private sector to be able to help solve the problem, to put parking and maybe put some trash enclosures in that location there to clean that that whole alleyway back up. And maybe we can pick up 35, 40 parking spaces. As far as other parking goes, we have this lot out here. This lot out here is part of a shared agreement. There's a shared parking agreement that was created back in the, I believe, the 70s. And every building that surrounds it is part and parcel to that agreement, which that parking provides a percentage of the ordinance required parking for commercial. As part of that agreement, that owner is required to have, or the manager of that, which is the owner of the property is here at 11 Sondale Circle, also the manager, is required to maintain that with 106 parking spaces, asphalt, lighting. Obviously, you can see that that has not been done over the last 30, 40 years, and it's just completely fallen in disrepair. And so that's one of the things that we're going to be tackling as well, as far as being able to look at ways that we can increase the total amount of parking, and then how we can connect these types of parking lots with the commercial that we have. So those are the ways we're trying to solve parking.
Do you mind if I ask another
Go.
question?
No, go ahead.
Have you considered at all in taking any part of the park area that really isn't used and turning it back into a parking area? To answer your question, Los Portales, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, but can you hear me? If I owned that building and every spot was filled and was busy, and top and bottom in its glory days, right? But someone on the town council at that point in time, way back when, decided that they didn't want buses coming up here, and there were tour buses that used to come up here all the time and keep our businesses really going here. Well, that mayor and council decided they didn't want those tour buses anymore. So they took the land in the center and turned it into a park. If I own that building and they decimated my parking like that, I probably would be suing the town. I don't think they ever did, but, so I'm not totally down on the owner of that building. I can understand.
So
being
it's
upset.
revenge?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to that effect, lots of things change. There's a lot of decisions that impact it. I mean, I'll tell you right now, in the time that Los Portales has existed, Metro Center and Paradise Valley Mall have been built and completely redeveloped. So, it's I can't, whatever happened from people who I don't even think are even alive anymore in some cases. So do I think that we're gonna destroy the gardens to put parking in?
Well, that aren't being used is what I'm talking about. I mean,
Yeah.
there's areas that people don't even walk through very much.
I'm not quite sure about that, but what I would say is that when the parking analysis was done, when they did the gardens, that there was a like-for-like parking count for all of the parking spaces in and around on Easy Street that accommodated for all of the particular parking. I will also say that when Los Portales was built, that owner originally who built it, before it was built, was required to have a parking agreement. I'm assuming that the parking agreement, or they had to do on-site parking. Those were the two options that were because there was an attorney that got involved for what we're going to refer to as Tract A. That Tract A attorney, who at the time who owned it, so originally the owners of Carefree, the developers, they owned everything. Then they sold these things off. And when they sold them off, whoever owned Tract A, which was the grocery store at the time, basically said, you can't build that building without having some type of parking agreement. There is no parking agreement that was ever maintained for that. So I don't know where that parking was, or if there was ever an agreement that was even between the Tract A parking area and that ownership. I'm trying to find that. I've been actually trying to contact the attorney to figure out what that was.
Tract A was that, the park area.
It was the dirt lot.
That was part, that
Yeah.
was Tract A.
Yep. So.
All the owners were part of that at one time.
Yep.
Except that a few of them got together and agreed that, okay, Mayor, you can have it.
Yeah. So what I can say is, it's the nature of community development. I mean, things happen, you know.
I know, and my only reason in bringing all this up is to answer your question, but also to ask if there isn't any part that we could add some parking that's near there, you know, that owner would want to revitalize that building.
Yeah, so, and that's a good thing. I mean, you've been invited to participate in the circulation and parking plan, so these are things that we definitely need to bring up. And, you know, that's why we're doing the parking plan. I mean, I'm very sensitive to the idea that we wanted to grow retail growth, especially restaurants. You know, our calculations when they originally were done in this town were based on standard retail and commercial office. Well, restaurants have a significantly higher. So when you put a restaurant use into a commercial building, that you've just upped the total amount of parking that you need. So that is one of the things that we're going to definitely have, and that's why this parking plan is important. So do we look at the lot behind, in the alleyway behind where Venues is, you know, between Town Hall and where the Galleria? Absolutely, we need to start looking, is that an opportunity for parking there? You know, can we, I brought this up as part of a workshop session, you know, or an open house. Do we, in the future, look at putting a decked parking structure out here to support parking? I mean, those are the things we got to discuss. Is there ways that we can better utilize private parking? So, when you look at this also, I looked at really what this overall retail opportunity is, and what the tax rate, and I lumped in the hospitality with it because I'm going to just say Savannah and the Hampton are kind of more aligned with what, you know, serves as part of town center. Then we look at our vacant land potential redevelopment, which is the town hall site. If we were to look at redeveloping that particular site there, then the idea would be that we would sell that, trade that, do something in exchange for a town hall constructed building. Ideally, I would like to put it right here, adjacent to the town council chambers. We own the property. We already have 1,200 square feet of space up above. We have the space in here. We have a conference room. We have bathrooms. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why we can start to look at combining the facilities and creating more of a centralized look and taking that office use off a really, you know, important part right next to the sundial. Any other questions on?
Are the slides going to be available to us?
Yeah, I'll have the presentation. Everything will be available. Yep.
The only thing I would say, Steve, is that,
Speak up, please.
The only thing I would say, Steve, is that we do have to finish this presentation before next season.
Yeah. Hey, people ask for this, so it's important. And then the completed village center, so the Senate, we completed the redevelopment plan. This next session of the Economic Development Advisory Board, I'm going to get in a deep dive on the redevelopment plan and then what all of those next steps are. And there are things that we're working on. I know I kind of got into some details now. Probably should have said, but I just wanted to answer some questions because people, you know, ask questions. You know, in process right now, we have the signage, circulation, and parking plan. We're working on blight removal, as we talked about, with parking and some of this other stuff. People notice, we just put we extended some of the landscaping into some of the medians, so really looking to clean up our own property. You know, how do you ask somebody to invest in their properties when ours doesn't look good? So glad we're moving forward on that. You know, we still need to address the zoning codes and design guidelines. we talked about town hall site, and then the building program that we talked about doing on a shared revenue, or a leveraged basis, where the town provides some money and to leverage new reinvestment into private buildings. And then working with merchants. You know, we have a merchant group that's been budding, very tied in with the art galleries and our art night, and it's been growing and successful over the last 3 years. We're gonna be working with Madison with the merchants on more of branding and marketing, and that's gonna be a big component to try to get more cohesive message out, and then how we can really utilize our resources to the best, the best of our abilities. And then, you know, I work actively managing the Sanderson Lincoln Pavilion, doing a lot of events. Glad Madison's aboard because she's really been helping out. And if you've noticed, we put a lot of stuff. Every Saturday, we've been looking to have something into that pavilion for people to enjoy. And, you know, we've been doing more community-based events and working with groups where we can do civic events, like the park, which I thought was fantastic. And that's the kind of way we're looking to utilize that space. So. And then, you know, one of the things that's still on the docket is Tom Darlington Drive and Carefree Highway. And, you know, this really represents kind of $800,000 in retail sales tax revenue. And so I know there was a movement at this point to maybe consider this or reconsider this site on the general plan update. I personally think that's not how you do land use planning. You really look at doing an amendment process to focus on what's the best use for the neighbors. And so that meets the needs for the community. And so a lot of thought went into this particular special planning area. There's a reason why the state's set up the idea of using special plan areas and amendments for this type of site-specific land use development. And honestly, when we start looking at the revenues and the forecasts that we have, you know, if we're looking at $1.2 million in one corner and $800,000 on this, and maybe $300,000 to $400,000 in town center capacity, we're just going to be able to hit our mark to be able to make sure that we can fund our capital programs and make sure we have reserves in the bank for. It's just the way this is just the way it is, and so. You know, we did look at the 48 acres and did an evaluation on that to see if that could be included. And the community, even before, you know, we started looking at it specific for the park organization, was very in tune with the idea that they wanted to focus on non-economic development opportunities there. And so I'm glad it's kind of taken shape and form the way it is. Right now, the status, there's nothing submitted. We're not talking with anybody. And, you know, right now I kind of see it as the longer pole in the tent of the economic development strategy. And again, when we look at general plans and the way general plans operate, it's the general plan is the picture on the box. That's what you want the picture to look like, you know. And then you got zoning and all the other things of how you put the putt pieces together. And so there's a lot of opportunity for the community to be able to continue to weigh in on what the status of this particular property is going to be, to ensure that it's going to be exactly what we say it's going to be.
I have a question while you're on that. Where did the $800,000 projection come in for that site?
So the projections come in when you look at the total number of rooms. So if we project at...
So you're looking specifically at a hotel?
That's what the current general plan calls for as a resort. So if we were looking at a resort, then you look at the total number of rooms, what your estimated occupancy is, what you think that they can generate, you know, so you can look at the boulders down the street, see what they're, you know, there's ways you can look at what per room rentals are. And then you can take that information and just take it. And then the beauty of hotels is that not only do you get 3% in sales tax, you get 3% in occupancy tax too. So they generate 6%, plus there's a restaurant that would be associated with it as well.
Based on what you just said, what was the estimate for the Hampton Inn?
The Hampton Inn was...
Since we're not allowed to know the real numbers, what was the estimate?
Yeah, so here's the 900,000. I'm gonna say it's right around 300 to 400,000. And I,
Yes, or?
that's where the estimates come in at, yeah. Like again, you get proprietary. It came in right when I did the original estimate. It was right around 350,000.
And that was done with the technique you just went through with the
Yes.
parcel?
Yep. And from what I can see, and based on the numbers that seem to be coming in, those estimates seem to be pretty accurate.
If you're estimating 800,000, so that's like 200 rooms. If the Hampton Inn is 100 rooms, then you make 300,000.
Yeah, but you also have to understand that you're looking at a higher price point as well as having a restaurant on site.
So how many rooms are you
Oops, sorry. Yeah, so I think what we talked about when we did this analysis, when we did the general plan, was about 150 rooms total,
Plus a restaurant.
plus a restaurant. So, I mean, again, they're forecasts, so they're estimates, and you try to use the best guess you can get. So what I did is I take, what does the boulders charge? What are higher end? That's the best thing you can do. You start looking at what those occupancy levels are, and you make your best guess as to what you can get.
Wait, I'm sorry, I thought that in the general plan it's actually rural 70
No, that's its zoning.
That's the zoning.
zoning, but you're still thinking about, you're still calling that the current general plan is for a resort, even though it's zoned for R70.
Yeah, the current general plan is a special planning area, and through the special planning area, it outlines the nature of the use and what uses can't be there, and so that use is really specific to a high quality resort.
So, obviously, way down the road, but just a question, have we actually discussed anything with people that build resorts to find out whether or not, there's actually a demand for super exclusive high-end resorts that you charge $1,000 a night, only need to have about 55 or 60 rooms because it is just unbelievable. I mean, is there any demand for something like that?
There,
I don't know, I'm asking.
there could be demand. I mean, there's demand from high-end developers on this particular site. I would say the challenge right now is that the interest rates for funding these types of projects, because they're extremely expensive, just went through the roof, and so that demand is kind of, interest has kind of waned a little bit. But that's the thing, and this is the beauty of kind of how this is set up, is that, when we start looking, we have a better opportunity to evaluate the type of project we'd like to see on this particular site. So if something like that came along, and we can say, yeah, that's what we want, and it's going to be generating the types of revenues that we would expect, to be able to cover our costs, then I would say consider those things, right? And so when we look at a marketing program, and that's what the community is focused on, then we would market towards that type. Just like Scottsdale, when they looked at the Four Seasons, they just put a star on the map and said, this is going to be a resort. And people fought it, right? And now you have a Four Seasons there, and it sits in a really high-end community, and it's a great asset, and it projects, a lot of money, and I think they rent for $1,000 a night or whatever they rent for at a Four Seasons. So, in my mind, that's the quality I'm thinking. And when we went through the process, we specifically said, no branded architect. It was really going to be all the things that the neighbors said, okay, if we're going to go along with this, these are the demands, right? And, and so in general, the demands were no access to Langwood Lane. And so we're working on, access. Matter of fact, I don't even want anything developed up on the northern parcels. I'd like to keep everything within the wash. Nothing on the outside of the wash. Anything, density has to be towards the intersection, all of those things, so.
Just to remind you, Steve, the neighbors, one of whom I am, agreed to a 50-room small boutique resort. Those are your words. During COVID, not 150 rooms. Things have changed. Maybe you need to reconvene the abutters and discuss this 150-room project.
I'm also curious, Steve, what the allotment of water is for that. I believe that you could build 7 homes there. So we're going from 7 homes to 150 rooms. How does that work in terms of the drought and the need for water for a giant structure like this?
Yeah, as far as the water question, that's I think Greg needs to answer that question, to be honest with you. And he's been working on our water portfolio as it relates to what our economic development goals are. What I would say is that when we made the presentation on the Hermosa Inn, that it's the Hermosa Inn style, but Hermosa Inn is only on 7 acres. So if you extrapolate that to this at net of 15 acres, it's like 100. That's what we talked about. And even in the presentation that was made, and we can go back and look at the presentation that was made both through the Planning and Zoning Commission and through Council. I specifically said and compared it to Savannah at some level, that Savannah is 180 rooms, 185 rooms. That would be, when you look at square footage wise or acreage wise, that would kind of fall more into that. size, though I would think that the terrain is gonna really limit that. To be honest with you, I think it's gonna be less if it stays inside that wash area. You may even be looking at potentially less rooms. So again, those are the things that, you know, when we look at the qualitative factors of a particular project and you're gonna weigh it against what the economic opportunity is, the process for this is set up to the advantage of the community. And the community has the opportunity to review the zoning. The community has the view, and the zoning has to be completed with a site plan. And if for some chance the council says, you know what, screw you, community. P&Z says, screw you, community. The community just has to put it on the ballot and vote for it, because it's pretty easy to get something on a ballot for referendum here. And so it's really stacked in favor of the community to hold whatever gets built there accountable. And it was done by design that way.
Steve,
How would you go about getting that on
one
the
second.
ballot?
Steve, I have one question for you. So if it's a special planning area, okay, does that still give us the same leverage to keep another Hampton from coming in?
It gives us all the leverage to keep another Hampton from coming in.
Yeah, I think that's a big concern.
Yeah.
for a lot of folks.
I mean, that was, honestly, to be honest, that was an impetus for a lot of it, was to prevent a lower end branded hotel to come in on that
Yeah,
particular
as
piece
long
of
as we have the leverage to do
Yeah.
that, that's what I think everyone.
And understanding the circumstances for this is different. This was hard zoned back in 1958, you know, I mean, again, going back to the idea that Arizona is a very strong property right state. They had the entitlement, they had to write the build. It's commercial, allows for hotel in this town. I mean, they had all the advantages in their favor legally to build a hotel here. Whereas now, with that site, they don't have the legal entitlement. All we have is the picture on the cover of a box of a puzzle. That's what we put in place. That we are, yeah, I know, they're the ones asking questions. I know you wanna go watch a football game. But they're important questions. And then kinda looking at,
Gotta go, you gotta go.
yeah, then we look at all of our other retail sales tax opportunities, you know, and I know we've touched on these and I'm not gonna go through this, but I just wanted to show that, you know, yes, retail sales tax is going to grow, as Peter said, but we do have other opportunities. And we gotta be, you know, cognizant and paying attention to this as well, so. Wow, I should've just put football, let's go watch, you know, instead of questions.
Go blue.
Thank you. Yeah, and just,
Ron, your question was a good one, because people still refer to the Hampton Inn as a boutique hotel, and it's not. So it's a really good question, it's on a lot of people's minds.
and so again, the idea, I mean, this was a really open session. I mean, the idea is that this is a workshop group, and we're gonna keep these conversations in the forefront. So anybody who wants to come in and sit and listen in or participate, you know, however this board wants to handle these types of conversations, it's really up to you. And I just wanna make sure that the information that we're working with on the revenues and expenses, forecasts, all those things that we talk about, you know, I just throw out 3 million or this and that. We gotta have substance behind all these conversations. And I'm glad we're finally getting to that place, so.
Any more questions? Move to adjourn? Second. Okay.
By acclamation.
Thank you.
Steve. Thank you.
Thank you.
You learned something?
Thank you. That was a very good presentation.